So I'm Jeff. We're going to talk about consumer culture a bit. Before we get started, since we're talking about youth culture, feel free to unsilence your phones and be as distracted as you like. Send messages to anyone you want. It will not bother me. Each of you should have some information on your table about generations. Feel free to take it with you. Everything I'm discussing is pretty much outlined in the 3 books, but make notes as you wish. So as we talk about millennials, how many of you, by show of hands, have sort of heard that millennials are all broke, unemployed, living in their parents' basements as narcissists among a collection of participation trophies that they've never, ever earned? It's not true. It's not a terribly effective way to think about winning 80 million consumers who are more prosumer than consumer to the brands that you represent. And then along comes Gen Z, right? What's Z stand for, I'm asked? I don't know. I'm told it stands for zombie? Like they're always heads down looking at their phones. It appears I have a couple texts that I might need to take care of. Could you guys give me just a minute or two to answer a couple of these? You think I'm a zombie addicted to my phone? You think I can't put this down? Wait a minute. How many of you have a friend who sleeps with their phone? Let's just confess now. How about a friend who keeps the phone about right there on their nightstand? Just a couple of you are being honest this morning. I don't see that many hands. Let me ask a question. If I had a friend who kept a bottle of Mad Dog 2020 on their nightstand, do you think they have a drinking problem or just really bad taste? Both. All right. Well, this isn't a phone. This is a modern-day Swiss Army knife, capable of processing more information from more sources than ever before. It's how I'll check in for my flight this afternoon. It's how I'll pick a restaurant tonight in another city. It's how I'll connect with people before I make purchase decisions to check out brands. It's a trusted tool. Don't assume your employees are calling you back. It's not likely to happen. All right. So I'm going to draw on a couple of different sources of information, mostly our research, but certainly several others. Do you guys recognize this family? What family am I looking at? Modern Family. Modern Family is pretty different than the families we've looked at for the past, let's say, couple million years, right? We had a hunter-gatherer model. There was a man in charge, and they basically ruled in a very autocratic way. Now, is that the way modern families work? Certainly not this modern family, right? I mean, 10,000 women today are going to give birth to a child. Another 10,000 tomorrow, 10,000 the day after. They're millennial by birth year, many millennial by mindset. We'll talk about the difference. But the reality is, 1 in 4 and nearly 1 in 5 stay-at-home moms is now a dad. And in this family, everyone has a voice, and the male isn't in charge. If I asked you, who's the fastest growing group of people making $100,000 or more, what would you say? Would a lot of you say millennial women over the age of 30, I hope? Because that's the right answer. That's the right answer. If you want to look at the center of the bullseye of where trends start in this country, look at millennial women over the age of 30 for clues. And they're starting families in droves. So let's talk about family for just a minute. How many of you had this sort of schema that you're looking at in your life? I did. I mean, that was sort of the model I had. You didn't? You didn't sort of look at the school job. So then you must have had a different model, a more millennial-centric model. Looks like that. You do it in any order you want. Feel free to start your family, get married later, maybe. Finish college if you choose, right? There is no order imperative. And so for marketers, it becomes much harder because we used to be able to predict what was going to occur and make marketing choices based on a predictable life stage model that is far less predictable with a very different process that's far more collaborative as opposed to top-down than it's ever been in the past. So with that in mind, I'd just like to ask 1 or 2 additional questions. Did this group get Maslow? Food, water, shelter at the bottom. Maslow was a 1940s thinker, pre-digital social mobile, not a millennial expert, basically sort of looked at self-actualization pyramid a little differently. than what millennials would do. The truth is, you all know if I took that away, you would struggle a lot more than the water or the coffee, right? It would be difficult. So things are changing. They're changing rapidly. And Marla asked me to make a research presentation on Gen Z on a Monday morning. I said, there isn't enough coffee in Miami, Marla. We have an entire book on it. You can read it later if you'd like. But I'm going to do just a couple of highlights right from the book. You've got some information about Gen Z right in front of you. Let's just start with the most important fact at the top. They're old souls in young bodies. When I say old souls in young bodies, they're digital, social, mobile to the core. Half of millennials are fairly digital, social, mobile, but the older millennials, those millennials between sort of 30 and 40, aren't necessarily. And then the reality is they have very traditional values. Values that look much more like their grandparents than most of us in the room. They're going to make brands stand for something. They're going to demand proof. They're going to demand change. In fact, they're changing culture in this country right now. Which cohort is having the most impact on cultural conversations in this country right now? Not my generation, not your generation, Gen Z, right? They're demanding action. So as we think about this, I'd like to tease out just a couple differences between millennials and Gen Z. So if you heard millennials were all collaborative, they're on the same team. Gen Z, on the other hand, good old-fashioned competition is coming back. Look for the knife in the back from Gen Z. The reality is this generation plans to work very hard for their money. They are success-focused, and they are going to look very different on the topic of collaboration. Second, millennials were known for making some naive choices with social media. They were the first generation to sort of grow up in this social era. And they put everything online. Gen Z has their privacy meters turned on. They're not so naive. They don't want to make mistakes. They're not going to share as much information unless there's a quid pro quo. So all this talk about data is great as long as you figure out what that quid pro quo looks like, because you're not going to get it from them for nothing. Millennials were all about the environment. They demanded a lot of change in terms of environmental issues. Gen Z is all about equality. This is a sort of post-race generation. There'll be a minority-majority culture, which means there'll be no majority. And they're all about fairness and equality. So a different major topic than millennials. Millennials were known as sort of having a short attention span. Not that a lot of us don't also from time to time check out our phones and stop paying attention. Gen Z is redefining short attention span. Marketers are said to have all of 8 seconds at this point in order to capture their attention. So that will be the new normal. So if you're interested in this, we have a lot of research on Gen Z. You can download it with a simple Google search. You can obviously grab a copy of the book after we're done sharing some time here. I want to talk about love a little bit. You guys talk about love in the workplace, right? Right? You talk about love? Do you ever wonder about love a little bit, like dating, things like that? Anyone have a great date last night they want to talk about? See, consumers date brands. And if they like the brand, they go on another date, and they go on another date. And so we have a lot of conversations around loyalty when, in fact, it starts with a first date. And what causes me to go on a first date might not be as interesting to cause me to go on a second and third date. So let's just share a simple example. We go on a first date, and I bring you chocolates, and you think that's nice. We go on a second date, I bring you chocolates, nice again. We go on 100 dates. For 100 times, I bring you chocolates, 100 times in a row. Law of diminishing marginal returns, people. You don't think it's so wonderful. There's no spontaneity. Yet brands want to get the same output when they do the same thing 100 times in a row with consumers. And it doesn't make sense to me because the reality is there's no spontaneity. And without spontaneity, it's easy to divorce a brand. I mean, I can move 2 feet down the aisle in a grocery store. Any grocery store you pick. It's not Heinz versus Hunt's. I left the entire ketchup category behind in favor of an indirect competitor. It's called salsa. So we have to think about things differently. And the reality is this consumer is loyal to brands. They prefer brands. Our research empirically shows it. But you have to be willing to give up the equity you have in an old schema in favor of a new schema more rapidly, or there's no spontaneity. And that will create a problem. So as we were wondering about the relationship between love and money, we decided to commission a research study. We called it the Millennial Mindset. It wasn't just millennials, so I want to explain the study among a group of people who's probably very sophisticated about research. We studied consumers 16 to 65. Now, in case you didn't hear me, I said 16 to 65, which would be everything from Gen Z to baby boomers, right? And we wanted to look at the difference between stated and derived importance. Now, stated is sort of what I say, and derived is how I spend my time and money. So here's a simple example. I said I was going to be healthy this week. How many of you think I made it to the gym this morning? Nope, I didn't. And did I grab a donut on my way to breakfast? Well, of course. I mean, donuts are here in the lobby. I just grabbed one. What the? So derived and stated are not the same thing. We wanted to look at what people say, which is what a lot of research is. We also wanted to deconstruct how they're spending their time and money. And we wanted to do this in order to understand what drove sales and profit growth. So we've done the study again and again and again, and we've looked at different categories, and it's not one answer. It's different answers. But on average, 75% of opportunity is related to what I would call category drivers. So if you're McDonald's, location, price, taste probably are your category drivers. I don't work on the McDonald's business. I don't know. I'm making a guess. But I'm probably right. And if you can win on location, taste, and price and sustain advantage, congratulations. But 25% is probably related to brand, on average. There are puts and takes. So let's look at the puts and takes. If you compete on low price, then the 6 mindsets become less important. If you compete on differentiation, they become more important. If your category is really low interest, then mindsets become less important. If your category is higher interest, mindsets become more important. So 75-25 is an average. It could be more or it could be less. And the point of this is we wanted to be able to look at the opportunity at a brand level vis-a-vis direct and indirect competitors to look for the growth opportunity. So we identified 6 mindsets. Those 6 mindsets are on the screen. We've written about them. I'm only going to take a moment or two to talk about the mindsets just because of the amount of time we have. But the reality is brands are a set of interdependencies. So it's not like you can be great at one thing, terrible at another, and win. These 6 things work together. They're interdependent variables with coefficients that change based on the category and brand strategy you've chosen. All right? So just quick example, let's say social circle. Social circle is about cultural conversations. Cultural conversations are about word of mouth and word of mouth. So I have a daughter in San Francisco. She works for a brand called Pinterest. Pinterest is wildly popular among women, particularly women over the age of 40, right? Not millennial by birth year, millennial by mindset. So I want to dive deep on one of them just to illustrate this model that we built, okay? So the team built a model on the 6 mindsets to look at growth potential, one of which is purpose. Purpose is not generally the most important for brands. So don't walk out of here thinking purpose is number 1. For most brands, it's not. Purpose defined as adding good to the society. There's a layer of questions beneath purpose that connect to profit opportunity, and we start to look at it. I'm going to give you 2 simple stories. First is Tom's Shoes. Everyone know Tom's Shoes? I don't see that many heads nodding. Somebody tell me about Tom's Shoes. Just what is Tom's Shoes? What are they known for? Thank you. Okay. So buy one, give one. Does everyone feel comfortable that they know Tom's Shoes, buy one, give one? Great. So we get a call from Bain Capital through consulting firms. We do some of our work, not most, but some, through consulting firms and agencies. And so we get a call, and the call goes like this. We're working on the acquisition of Tom's Shoes. We're deep into this, and we'd like a point of view. Okay. So they hire us for a short project. So if you're working on this project, the first question you might ask is, in your research, what % of consumers associate 1-for-1 with Tom's? Their answer is everyone. Okay, so you're telling me your research suggests there is no gap between 1-for-1 and association with this brand. If there is no gap, there is no profit opportunity likely created by closing the gap. So first thing is, if your assumption is you're buying the brand for purpose and you have profit growth opportunity on purpose, my assumption is bad choice. Second, my assumption, looking at your data, and I encourage you, again, this is a conversation back to the client, Bain Capital, to look at your data. Tell me, how many shoes does the average Tom's buyer have? Oh, they have X. Let's say it's 2 pair for the purpose of discussion. Well, if you had better fit and better fashionability, they might have 4 pair or 5 pair. You could double the size of your sales and profit potentially by looking at other variables. So the key point here is on this variable for which the brand is famous, there's no gap. Now let me give you another example. So I'm an avid cyclist. Most of you wouldn't know that. And I got hit in the bike lane a couple years ago. Hit by an ER doctor on a nice sunny day in the bike lane. And what was that ER doctor doing? Texting and driving. That's exactly right. So after a short stay in the hospital, I called a friend of a friend at AT&T, an executive vice president I knew in the marketing group, and I said, tell me about this program you have called Don't Text and Drive. He says, it's amazing. Nobody remembers the price du jour, promotion du jour, how many gigahertz you saw in the AT&T ad in the national championship game just a few days ago. It's absolutely all forgotten. Yet, there are a few people, who hate on the brand AT&T. I'm sure not anyone in this group. And we close this gap called purpose around a program called Don't Text and Drive. So as you think about this large brand that doesn't have a lot of soul for some consumers, this is a great opportunity to drive growth for that brand. So understanding where you are is really, really important. So I've spent a good deal of time giving you some sense of a framework. I'd like to take it a little further and apply some of these frameworks to the brands that we work on and likely the brands you work on as well. So the first is remarkable experiences are amplified. Ordinary experiences are long forgotten. I curate my social identity through remarkable experiences. I mean, after all, if we went out to drinks in Miami tonight and it was amazing and it didn't go in my Instagram account, did the drinks even exist? Probably not. So remarkable experiences are amplified. And today's consumer is looking to create their story. I use the term consumer. It's really an error on my part. They're a prosumer, and they're going to co-create their story, which means story living becomes as important, if not more important, than storytelling. The great big brands of yesterday were amazing storytellers. They heated, beated, and treated their products. They heated, beated, and treated their ads. They used traditional forms of advertising, and everything was good. Unfortunately, that model doesn't work as well anymore. So what we would argue is modern consumers require proof, and brand positioning is going to need to account for that. So to thirsty, sweaty jocks, Gatorade is the original sports beverage that enhances performance. Volvo equals safety, of course. You know this. You know how to create these models. But in Tomorrowland, what you're going to have to do is give them proof. So just for saving a little bit of time, I'm not going to go through the video, but I am going to take you through a quick story. So we got a call a couple years ago. We had been doing a lot of research we published. We'd never met anyone from Hershey. I'd never been to Hershey's offices. And they said, we'd like you to take a look at this brand we have called Take 5 through the lens of the millennial research, which we've already downloaded and looked at. They've already spent a lot of time getting to know us, not that we've ever met, okay? So they had a review. It lasted about 2 to 3 weeks. It was short. It included 2 or 3 firms. And they basically engaged us based on the gravitas we brought around this consumer. And the idea was they reformulated the product, more protein, less sugar, and then we thought about the product through the lens of amplification. So we launched at South by Southwest, where consumers could turn in their swag for anything from a new Take 5 bar to something more exciting, like a real human to wait in line for you at a really cool restaurant. And then we took that and created partnerships with brands like Uber, and we rolled it out through a series of activations, because that's what a modern brand would do when they're trying to get consumers to sample this new product. I'm going to, again, sort of skip through the video just to give you some time. So thinking about it through that lens, for a large company like Hershey, that is a very different world, right? That was a very scary thing. By the way, it ended well for Hershey. This was the fastest growing candy bar, not only in Hershey's portfolio, but in the entire category during the year of this launch. So the second big trend I want to sort of look at is culture of content. Culture of content is something I know you're all familiar with. And culture of content requires some different thinking in our view. So with culture of content, it requires a strategy for each quadrant, for each brand, consistent with the brand's editorial authority and voice. So that suggests at a brand level, for every brand in the portfolio, you would have a view, and you would be nimble enough to act on that view on a quadrant basis. Planned, unplanned, proactive, reactive. I would make it look better, but I can't do anything better than draw some of these kinds of things, so this is what you get. All right, modern consumers crave information. The thesis several years ago, and we sort of laid it all out in writing, was content would lead to loyalty. If you could look at your CRM data as a large CPG company, you would find correlations and causations between the 5% of your most avid content consumers and the 5% of your most active buyers. In Tomorrowland, that will look different. That will be the intersection of CRM, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and giving me what I need. Brand will actually be more important because there will be a technology convergence. This is my opinion, not supported by all the facts in the world, just supported by a view of consumer trends. So content, we're in the early stages. It's going to become more important, B2C and B2B, to produce content that informs me as a consumer. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. The first one is for Dairy Queen. Dairy Queen is a client of Barkley's. Marissa has gone to Twitter on Free Cone Day. Can you imagine what it's like to work in Dairy Queen on Free Cone Day for just a moment? Right? You're Marissa, you're not excited. Marissa has taken to Twitter and she has violated the employee policy manual. So we have 2 options. We can lean into the policy manual, a terrible choice, or we can give her some attention, a much better choice. And on Free Cone Day, we have a social media command center set up, and the woman running the center knows anything could happen, so she responds on behalf of the brand. Hang in there, family member. How long's your shift? Marissa, on the other hand, responds, hey, wow, they noticed. I'm working 3:30 to 9. Please do. It'll make it 10 times better. And then, on behalf of the brand, we start sending Marissa these little pieces of love. What happens on Free Cone Day? What's Marissa going to do when she receives this? Guess. She's going to share. She's going to laugh. Is Marissa going to have a better day when she does this? Yeah. How many hundreds upon thousands of employees are going to start receiving these within a matter of hours? Marissa has friends. Marissa's friends work at Dairy Queen. They laugh and share all of this content. On Free Cone Day, what ultimately happens when this goes on? It's an unplanned response. It's a lower left quadrant response. Our employees have a better day. When our employees have a better day, our guests, our brand fans have a better day. Ultimately, Warren Buffett has the best day. I would go in deeper, but we can't. It's a public company and the data at a brand level isn't shared. But trust me, the correlations are obvious, okay? So that's one example. I want to share a second example. The second example is for Spirit Airlines. Now, Spirit Airlines is a value brand. They compete on a value segment. How many of you are familiar with the brand Spirit? Okay, I see a lot of hands. So our job is to, in part, close the gap between the digital and the analog world in terms of what our guests expect from our brand. And so as we're thinking about this brand, we're trying to look at all the touch points there are, both digital touch points and analog touch points, and create content in the upper right quadrant that'll impact their Net Promoter Score. Because ultimately, that's going to have a significant impact on brand value and how much excitement there is for this brand. So I'd like to share this little case study with you.
Spirit Airlines, the ultra-low-cost, wildly misunderstood airline, faced a tough challenge. How do you overcome the hate by educating its customers on its unique way of flying, all with a fraction of a typical airline's marketing budget? Our first job was to hug our haters, so we turned social media venom into education with a promotion no other airline would ever run.
And I just got charged from a carry-on, maybe pay for a water, no leg room. And this guy says he'd rather eat broken glass than fly with Spirit.
We collected over 43,000 pieces of hate about the airline industry and discovered some surprising facts.
5% hate the food, 15% hate the delays, and 20% really hate the airline seats.
To communicate our stripped-down model, we rebranded our fare as the Bear Fare. It's the cost of your seat and one personal item. We dedicated a whole section of our site to teaching our customers our a la carte business model. Over 2 million customers visited. Rather than pay for media, we created educational yet provocative content designed to gain free publicity, culminating in 650,000 views. In our stripped-down style, we redesigned hundreds of touchpoints, using them as media channels. We started with the basics and rebranded everything, including our planes, to highlight just how different we are. We launched a new Spirit market by creating a media channel made of soybeans. For the first time, we used social media to educate and engage our customers in a low-cost way. We made a soulful How to Fly Spirit video.
Oh, bring your own snacks, or you'll have to buy them on the plane.
You're gonna have to buy my nuts.
Oh, buy some water and wash them down.
Way.
By communicating our differences, Spirit is well on its way to turning the hate around and building true brand love.
So I imagine to this group, I don't have to sell real hard on how important content is and how different it'll look in Tomorrowland. Third is innovation. So innovation is an expectation that modern consumers have of brands. I often personally wonder about the impact innovation has on employee engagement and retention, because when I look at the highest performing brands, they seem to do well in that area. Having said that, we tried to articulate a point of view about how to think of innovation through a very different lens. So many companies look at sustaining and disruptive innovation. What we suggested was take a portfolio approach to your innovation, the way you would take a portfolio approach to your brands. You're going to have core, emerging, and blue ocean or disruptive innovation opportunities. Assign a numeric number to each one. Maybe you want to make 3% of your bets in blue ocean, 10% in emerging, and the rest in core. Whatever that is for your brand, assign that value, and then use a bifurcated financial model to measure how you're going to do things. This is the only content that's not in the book, so I'm going to explain it for you real quickly. If you look at most brands, they make most of their bets in core. They have ROI models that are scalable, and they tend to sort of move forward by a little bit. And they say, this is innovation. Great, you have a new flavor of toothpaste. I don't know that the consumer sees that as innovation, but okay. Or there's sort of this disruptive. There's the need states, there's the palette states, and that's where we see often the emerging indirect competitors take big leaps. So on emerging indirect competitor sort of disruptive innovation, 2 questions you want to ask and answer. First, is this idea something you can afford to test? And second, is it within your brand's authority? If the answer is yes, you can afford, yes, within your brand authority, then on disruptive innovation, don't run the ideas through the same financial models, the same stage gate process as you would your sustaining, or by definition, core and emerging ideas, because all you're going to do is make no-go decisions. Right? Because disruptive innovation doesn't fit into that model. So you need to create different processes and different models in order to optimize the full portfolio of innovation. All right, with that in mind, there were a couple rules. So my mom's not in the room. She taught me the golden rule. How many of you had a parent who taught you the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you want done unto. It's great in life. It's terrible for innovation, okay? Terrible. For innovation, you want to replace the golden rule with the platinum rule. Treat others the way they want to be treated. Everyone has different needs. Some of us buy value brands, some buy premium brands, some want X, others want Y. So you have to do empathy research in order to tap into it. You have to be looking at how you do innovation through a different lens. If the process you use to do innovation is not innovative, how likely is it you're going to be to get to innovative solutions? I mean, if the process is stage gate, are you likely or unlikely? So with that in mind, we really did a lot of thinking and work in that space, and that's where we spend a great deal of our time and energy with our clients. Fourth is you're going to have to engage employees first. If you're going to win in Tomorrowland, you're going to have to be a real brand, a brand that delivers proof that you really are what you say you are. And that means your employees are going to have to love your brand at least as much, if not more, than the 5 or 6 or 7% of the brand fans who really embrace your brand and spend a ton of money on that brand. So as we were discussing this and looking at our own data, our HR team had some thoughts. I mean, if you were in our office, we have a gym that's free. We have a trainer who comes to work at 7:45 in the morning. I don't try to train with the other people who are like 25 and 30 years old. It slows everything down. But it's free. It's 7:45 in the morning. You can come to the office, go to the gym, get training for free, and in our research, it never bubbles up. It never bubbles up. All the benefits we offer never bubble up. So we started to think about millennials, and we started to think about the fact that they're having children later, and we have this program where it's like you can bring your kid to work, and it's okay, but like if you're a 30-ish-year-old mom and you have a 1-year-old, do you really want your 1-year-old at work for the day? I mean, is that really going to be fun for you? Probably not. So we kept Bring Your Kid to Work Day, but we thought, maybe we need to think about this through a different lens. So thank you. The credit for that goes to the HR and leadership team for recognizing Bring Your Kid to Work Day. It could be enhanced by adding Bring Your Parent to Work Day. And it's interesting, when we look at the research, it creates more passion than some of the most expensive benefits we offer. So I'm often asked, how does this come about, and how did we get to where we are? First, it starts with our CEO, Jeff King. I came on board in January of 2010 to run sales and growth, with a background mostly in client strategy. And I told Jeff, I don't really like to make sales calls unless people are really interested in talking to me. So I imagine, like you, I keep a lot of plate spinning. I'm a professional plate spinner, and I imagine most of you are professional plate spinners. So my job was sort of to keep the existing model in place while I tried to imagine a new model. And I knew what the new model wouldn't be. It wouldn't be that. It wouldn't be always be closing, because I knew that in Tomorrowland it was going to be about collaboration. So I kept knowing that Jeff had my back, right? And that we would create a new program, but we didn't know what it was. And I said, we need to create a program around content. And of course, Jeff's question is, well, what's the topic? And my answer is, I have no idea. So what would I do? I started crowdsourcing information from people internally and externally. I started looking at all the content being produced, from Harvard Business Review to Forrester to Bain, McKinsey, BCG. I'm looking at lots of information. I create an entire war room of ideas coming in from people. And with that, we launched a research project in the beginning of 2011. We launched a research project to study millennials versus older consumers on all kinds of topics. Why? Because there was nothing in the public domain on this topic in 2011. So we wanted to be thought leaders, and one of the criteria that we had put down was first to market on the topic. If you did a Google search at this time, you would find data from Pew on millennials and religion, and that was about it, okay? And so I called a friend of a friend at Boston Consulting Group, and I said, hey, I got this idea. How about we do this research, and maybe you could help us and pay for half the research. And she said, I want to make sure I understand the ask. You want us to do the research with you and pay for half the research. And I'm like, exactly. She's like, I'll get back to you. And of course, I wasn't born last night. I was born at night. I figure I get back to you means it ain't going to work out. But she did call back 2 weeks later, and she said, you know what? We think you found gold in California before the rest of the world. You're right. There's not a single piece of data from a reliable source on millennials as consumers in the public domain. We will pay for half your study. I will assign my best team to this project. They will work on it night and day. I'm the global head of research. It will be my biggest priority. And I thought, thank you, Christine. So with that, we had a research project, but that was only the first stage. The second stage is we announced we're going to have a conference in May of 2011. At this point, I got Jeff in my corner and everybody else probably ready to kill me because I issued a press release announcing Share Like Buy, where we will unveil American Millennials Deciphering the Enigma Generation, the world's largest study of millennials as consumers, in San Francisco in the fall. And I had not one single speaker, not one registered participant, and no sponsors for the conference. So I've never put on a conference in my life, but I didn't realize how complicated it could be. But I figure if you're going to create the thought leadership, you better have a conference and invite everyone to attend. So again, I'm calling everyone I know, and everyone's like, I'll get back to you. Maybe is the answer everyone has. Long story short, Nobody is signing up to speak at my conference. I'm getting distraught, and my team is saying, I told you not to send out that press release. Finally, I get to Frito-Lay. I get to the woman who runs research, and she says, I love this, and I'm so excited. And she says, and I hate to speak at conferences, and I'm about ready to cry. And she says, but I'm sending an email right now to Rudy Wilson, the global head of the Doritos brand. He loves this stuff. I'm sure he'll come. You have to remember, Doritos reinvented the Super Bowl back in the day, and Rudy Wilson said he's coming. I then called everyone back who said maybe, maybe, maybe. And on the day I called, they're like, I was just going to call you today, Jeff. My calendar opened up. And everyone from the CEO of Mr. Youth to the founder of Shopkick said yes. We sold the conference out. We had budgeted to lose money. We turned it into a profit. And everything started to go from there by having this open source conference with competitors who spoke, with other people who were doing interesting work invited to attend. It all sort of played out the way I had hoped, not without a few panic attacks along the way. I'm sure you've all been there. I also engaged someone some of you would recognize to help build the fundamentals of this program around content. Because the truth is, 90 to 95% of what we do is content marketing. Thought leadership isn't defined by me, it's defined by the community. It's defined by other people who use and cite the work, not by me or our team. And so we needed to put in infrastructure, and we put that infrastructure in using Michael, ultimately creating what I call a spider web where people find us, and we're happy to make sales calls when people find us. I would just prefer to call someone who invested an hour of their time reading a research report or a couple hours reading a book, because they're more aligned to our values, they're more predisposed to purchase. The sales cycle is completely different. So with that, I'd like to invite our moderator back up and offer a little Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.